Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. Welcome.
We'll move to Pledge of Allegiance after you call the meeting to order.
Thank you, Dr. Trujillo. So let's call the meeting to order.
Michelle, do you want me to do roll call?
Yes, please.
Okay. Ms. Grijalva? Dr. Grivosha?
Here.
Ms. Luna Rose?
Here.
Ms. Shaw?
Here.
Ms. Counts?
Okay, thank you. Looks like Ms. Grijalva has joined us. Hello. Okay, so let's go ahead and start the Pledge of Allegiance. I see we have a student here who I believe is going to lead us through the Pledge of Allegiance. Hello. Diana.
Hi.
Hello, Diana.
Hi.
What school do you go to?
Maldonado.
Oh, great. How do you like it there?
I like it there. Yeah.
Fabulous. And what grade are you in?
5th grade.
5th grade. Nice. Well, thank you for joining us today. I think we're going to pull up a video of the flag before you begin. Okay, and go ahead and start whenever you're ready.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Lovely. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Dayanara.
Thank you, Dayanara.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so
You're welcome.
right on. Okay, so sorry everybody, bear with me while I figure this out. Let's see. So we did the pledge. Next up, we have forgive me. Okay, review of open meeting laws, and that is going to be led by Council Ross. Are you here?
Yes, Board Secretary Shaw, there are no agenda adjustments tonight, no calls to the audience. We go straight to our General Counsel, Mr. Ross, who will take the board through a refresher course and overview of open meeting law requirements. Mr. Ross.
Thank you, Dr. Trujillo and Board Clerk Shaw. Good afternoon, board members. And since this is a retreat format, I'm hoping that it's more of a discussion than just a presentation, and that board members feel free to, stop, ask questions, and also participate in the discussion, because I don't want to just sit here and talk about the open meeting law. I want to have actual scenarios and discuss things that can really happen, and take questions, have you all discuss it as well. Next slide, please, Gene. But I will start with a little bit of an overview. And I know that you've all received some of this information from a couple of sources. I just want to kind of set the stage for what we have. And this is what I want to do, is just the overview, and then we'll talk about scenarios. Actually, we'll work those in as we go along, and then questions. And I know this is in a sequence, but on the slide here, but I'm hoping that we mix all those up together as we have this discussion over the next half hour, 45 minutes. Next slide, please. Okay, so the open meeting law really is pretty simple, and it's stated in the purpose in the statute that the public policy of the state is that public bodies have open meetings so the public can see what's happening, and that they get notice of what's going to be discussed, so they know whether or not they want to come, or in our case, whether or not they want to tune in to our streaming or listen to it in some other way. So that's basically what the public policy is behind it, and everything else flows from that. Next slide, please. So what does the open meeting law apply to? It applies to public bodies, not to private bodies, not to management, unless there are specific circumstances about management meetings. But it applies to public bodies that are elected, such as you are, to any advisory committees that you may establish or subcommittees that you may establish. And the advisory committees in this district include your board committees like the Audit Committee, the Technology Oversight Committee. You have the Family Life Curriculum Committee. You've got the Employee Benefits Trust, and all of your school councils also have applicability to the open meeting law, and we do train them in this as well. So let's start right off with some scenarios, and remember that that class participation is part of your grade here. So I want you to jump in. Okay, so here's your first scenario. The superintendent posts a notice on the website that he's inviting residents to join a group to discuss possible changes to the student code of conduct. Okay. Is there any open meeting law implication to that action?
Rob, can you repeat the question?
Okay, so the superintendent posts a notice that invites residents to join a group to discuss the student code of conduct changes. Is there any open meeting law implication to the superintendent having such a group?
Okay, and I just want to say hello to my fellow board members, and please just unmute yourself, and you can just chime in when you need to.
So my response would be that if more than 2 board members attend this community forum, then open meeting laws would be an issue. But if there's only 2 or less board members involved and attend, then there wouldn't be.
Okay, that's correct. So the superintendent can establish any committee. See, when we do this in person, we're going to have one of Rob's famous Jeopardy games. And we'll do it in that format. But yes, that's correct. So the superintendent can establish committees, or other staff members, other departments can establish committees. And as long as Dr. Grewash-Shaw said, as long as there aren't a quorum of board members attending and discussing board business or even receiving that information, there's no open meeting law. Okay, let's say that the superintendent announces that that group to discuss student code of conduct changes, announces it at a board meeting during an agenda item that's talking about school culture and climate. Does that change your answer at all?
Say that again. I missed something in the nuance of that.
So rather than posting a notice, the superintendent raises this during the board meeting in an agenda item that's talking about school culture and climate. So rather than posting it on the website, now it's discussed at a board meeting during that agenda item. Does that change anything?
Well, wouldn't we be exempt because we're in the board meeting?
If it's related to an agenda item, then it's fine. But if it's separate from any agenda item, then it would be inappropriate to discuss at that board meeting.
So when that group convenes, does it make any difference that it was announced at a board meeting during an agenda item? I see Ms. Grijalva has an answer. Subtle, but she's got one.
Well, you know, we've done a couple of these trainings, and I'm trying not to be that kid that's like, I know the answer, I know the answer. So I'm just sitting here. But no, because it's still not a meeting of the board. So really, his posting the item isn't necessary unless it's going to be an open to the public where 2 or more of us might show up. But talking about it at the board meeting, I don't think.
Okay, so that's right. It doesn't matter. It really matters, as the original answer from Dr. Gravoy-Shaw said, is whether a quorum of the board is attending. Okay, so let's start there and say no board member is going to attend, but at that meeting where the superintendent announces this formation of this group, the board then votes to establish that committee. Does that change anything?
At the meeting, at the community forum, they're voting?
So at the meeting, at the school culture and climate agenda item,
okay,
where the superintendent says, I'd like to create this, I'm going to have this community group. The board says, I move you do that, and votes on it. Does that change anything?
I don't believe so.
Anybody else?
I mean,
whether there's an agendized item for that we can vote on or not.
It changes it because now it's a board committee. Now it's our committee, and now they follow the same rules we have to follow, versus a superintendent's committee doesn't have to have those same
right.
guidelines.
But is it about that, or is it about, are you asking about open meeting law violation?
Well, the question is whether the committee would be subject to the open meeting law. Does it apply?
Yes.
Yes. The question about whether or not the item was properly voted on, the item that I described in the hypothetical was school culture and climate, and I could make a good argument that would be student code of conduct, and development of that is substantially related. But best practice would be to specifically do that. But in terms of whether the committee is now subject to the open meeting law, the answer is it would be, because the board has voted to establish it. It's now a subcommittee of the board. Okay, another one here.
Can I just interject really quick?
Sure.
Because it was a little confusing to me when I first started. So Dr. Trujillo has created a couple groups that are not official board committees, but say task forces or working groups. And those are different than board appointed and board created committees, which we vote on, and then which are beholden to all the laws of open meeting law and all the laws that we need to also follow. So I hope that clarifies it. It's just that, there, like Ms. Grijalva was saying, there's a distinction. Once you become a approved and voted on board committee, then you are subject to all the laws. That's exactly right. There are a couple of ways that can happen, though. It could be a vote as obvious as what I just described, where the board says I vote to establish that committee. It can also be, according to the Attorney General, actually the statute too, that if the presiding officer of the body appoints people to that committee, then it becomes a public body. Or if the board votes to delegate duties to a group. So say the superintendent establishes that group and the board says, we would like that group to come back to us with information about this particular area of the student code of conduct before we approve it. Mm-hmm. That creates a public body there as well. Okay. Now that doesn't mean that these task forces or groups that the superintendent establishes would not necessarily be open to the public. It just means that they're not required to be under the open meeting law. There are a lot of good reasons to make those kinds of meetings. So Rob, does that officially change that group from a task force to now a
committee, those three things that you said, if we are tasking them to do board work, if it is, I think you said the president would
appoint people,
which is different, correct me if I'm wrong, but different than suggestions.
Correct.
Okay. And then there was a third one. And so does that change the nature of the group itself from an unofficial to, if any of those three actions happen, to a committee?
It makes it a public body.
A public body. Okay.
Yes, and subject to the open meeting law.
Okay.
And you're right. Suggesting. So if the board, well, it's actually 4. So if the board votes to establish it or appoints its members.
Okay.
Okay. And to me, those are pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
If the presiding officer appoints or establishes it.
Okay. When you're saying presiding officer, are you talking about the board president?
That would be the chair of the,
of the committee itself?
Of the board. So if the board president, for example, said, I'm creating a subcommittee or says, I'm appointing people to the superintendent's committee.
Okay. I got it.
That's a little more of a gray area, but I would, since the open meeting law is supposed to be construed very broadly, then we'd have to err on the side of openness in that situation.
Okay, that's 2. And then what was the last one? Or
let's see. We have the board. We have the board creating it. The presiding officer creating. Oh, if the board delegates a function to an existing committee.
Okay. And the first 2 you were counting as 1.
Well, they're pretty much the same thing. Establishing and appointing members is that's I count those as pretty much the same thing.
This is clear to me just because of the little bit of experience that I have on the board, but I'm wondering if fellow board members have any questions. And if not, just please go ahead, Rob.
Okay, so here's another scenario. So let's say the board is looking at a plan aimed at increasing enrollment in the district, and it votes to engage a marketing consultant to make recommendations before the board approves a plan. So that consultant's contract includes engaging focus groups. So are those focus groups subject to the open meeting law? This is the intermediate level open meeting law class. Anybody have a guess at that one?
I'll guess no. And the reason why I say no is if they're focus group members, aren't we getting them, we're asking people to sign up to be a focus group member? So they're not elected officials.
Or appointed by the board.
Right.
This is the marketing consultant who's doing this. You've told the marketing consultant, we want a recommendation and we want you to use focus groups, and that's all you say in the contract. So the answer to that one would be no, because you're not appointing the focus group. You're not delegating anything to the focus group. Really, this is the marketing consultant's business to go out and gather those groups and come back to you with a recommendation. So that's been actually an issue in other places that I've been, where the district hires a consultant like that. They have these focus groups, and then people complain that those weren't open to the public. And the answer is they don't have to be, because all the board did was engage a consultant and told them to use focus groups or other community input. It didn't require any specific persons on those groups or have a particular product from them. Okay, next slide, please. So the open meeting law applies to
Jean, next slide, please. It applies to meetings of the public body, and a meeting, a meeting occurs when you have a quorum of your public body. So in this board's case, that's 3. And it's when you gather to discuss, deliberate, or decide an issue that is or may come before the public body. And the interpretation of discuss, deliberate, or decide is really broad by the Attorney General. So even just receiving information, receiving a presentation on an issue that is or may come before the board with a quorum of the board can be considered an open meeting law event. So if it's a meeting, so if you're gathered for the purpose of gathering information on an issue that may come before the board, then that must be in public. Now, there are some carved out practical exceptions to this. For example, if a quorum of the board goes to the Arizona School Board Association's conference and receives information about the operations of school districts and advances in governance and things like that, that is not considered to be a meeting. That does not have to be in public. But if you bring in someone from the Arizona School Board Association to discuss with your board issues that may come before the board, how to change your governance structure or advances in education, now you are looking at an event that needs to be in public. Next slide, please. So next group of scenarios. First one is the basketball game. So let's assume that COVID is not a restriction here, and board members score some tickets to a U of A game and invites another board member. And they sit there at the board meeting, at the basketball game, and they just cannot concentrate on the game. They're just talking about board business the whole time. So it's board member A, board member B. Any open meeting law issue there? So they're talking board business, 2 board members at a basketball game.
That is an issue.
That is an issue?
Yes. If they're discussing board business at a basketball game. Oh no, I'm sorry, there's 2. So if I'll give a scenario. So if me and Dr. Gravasha are at an event and we're talking board business, it's okay. But if Ms. Counts comes in and says, "Hey guys, what you talking about?" then that's when we're in violation.
So that's my next. You're right. That's my next permutation on the scenario. Let's say you and Dr. Gravasha are at the game, and then Ms. Shah comes in and sits down and her seat is in the row right in front of you, and so the 3 of you are in close proximity. Is there, and you're continuing to talk about board business, is there an issue there?
Yes, because she's in earshot of our conversation, so she could easily turn around and offer discussion.
So that I would say that there would be a potential issue there with 3 board members all hearing, or at least being able to hear the same conversation about board business. So that should, once that 3rd person comes there, then you should all concentrate on the game. Stop talking about board business. Okay, so the last permutation here. Let's say the entire board is invited to a presentation to be recognized at the beginning of the U of A game for your excellence in education during this trying COVID time. So all 5 board members are invited to the floor to be recognized by the community. Is there any open meeting law issue there?
So we have to post that we're all going to be there, but if we not talk any board business and it's not a meeting, we're just there to support this team or support something, then that's okay as long as there's some kind of posting that all of us are going to be there. Some can't remember the term, but there's some term about more than 1 board member being at an event.
So that's the right answer there. So as long as you're not talking about board business, you could all stand there and receive the accolades that you deserve
and then you'd go to your separate corners and not talk about board business. But that would be an event there that you're right that we would post as a 3 or more is kind of the shorthand term that we use it, that we post that it's not going to be any board meeting. There's not going to be any board business discussed, but 3 or more members may attend, so that members of the public are noticed that, okay, we've seen them all gathered here, but it's okay, they're not talking about board business, no open meeting law issue.
And Rob, that is true for if we're all at a certain graduation or celebration of the stars, recognizing our teachers. You at administration always posts when there's 3 of us at an event together. 3 or more.
We try to catch all those so that the public is aware. It's not a legal requirement; it's a best practice.
Okay.
So if you just happen to, you all go to a football game and it turns out you're all there, that's okay. You don't have to post that. It's just that as long as you don't talk about matters that are or may come before the board, you can all be there and talk about how great the Saguaro football team is doing that day. That's perfectly fine to do. But we try to, you're right, we try to post those so that at least the public can be aware that you may see them there, but they're not doing anything wrong. And it's also a reminder to you all to, make sure you stay away from board business if a quorum of you are together.
Yeah. Rob?
Yeah.
One other thing, because it happens, that we will show up at the same places. Try not to all sit together. Like 2 of us can sit together, but not nearby. Just, it's good for us to split up in general. And then when we're on a stage together, obviously we're not talking to each other. People can't see it. You're saying hi and that kind of thing. It's fine. But even if we're talking about nothing that has to do with board business, we're talking about some stale fries or whatever. If me and Natalie and Layla are together talking about something, you'll hear about it. So it's just better for us to try not to kind of stand near each other in general, unless we're doing some activity. Just because I've been on the other side of that, where it was a totally innocent conversation, but people can assume because we're together that we're doing something else. And it's the same for funerals. If there's a funeral of a longtime staff member for TUSD or a principal, when we've had those, more of us attend those events, and it's just a nice to do. And if we are all invited to something that we think we might go to, even if it's not TUSD related, it's some sort of retirement party or whatever that has nothing to do with TUSD, but we know because we look at the email, just call the staff and tell them, here's the details to post to 3 or more, just to be safe. Because it doesn't hurt us to post it if only 1 of us show up, but if we think 2 or more of us might go, then we should post it.
Just to be clear, 3 or more is a courtesy, it's not a legal requirement.
It's not a legal requirement, it's a best practice. And as I said, it's good for both public notice and also to kind of remind the board members that, as much as it may seem convenient not to discuss board business if you see 2 of your colleagues nearby. Okay, this is the scenario that we run into the most is emails. And so let's say that Ms. Luna Rose forwards a link to an online article about a district that opened a new kind of arts academy and forwards that to the whole board. Is there, with no other comment, is there any issue with Ms. Luna Rose doing that? Ms. Luna Rose, what do you have to say for yourself?
Excuse me, I had to sneeze. Sorry. If I am just sending an email to my colleagues on the board, just as an FYI, I do believe as long as we don't have the other 4 board members reply, or maybe only 1 reply, that we are in compliance.
So let's say 1 replies to the whole group saying, I think we should do this. Does that change anything for you?
No, as long as nobody else replies.
Okay, so here's the issue with that one. So you've got 5 board members. One has just, provided the link to the article, and another one has now proposed to the entire quorum that an action, which is doing what's in the article. So that would probably be seen as a violation. This is why there have been a couple of boards across the country who eliminated the feature of reply to all on their email system. I don't know that you need to do that. I think you get pretty accustomed to not replying, and I know that Dr. Trujillo is very careful about putting folks on a BCC and also reminding them not to reply. So that I would suggest that practice for you as well. If you're going to forward that article, you may want to remind folks not to reply to all, and so that you avoid the open meeting law issue.
So can I ask you, that initial email is fine? So I can send an email out to my 4 board colleagues with an article or something, your recommendation. That's not an open meeting law violation, this information to board colleagues.
If all it is just the information with no comment about whether or not it's supported or not, then that would not be a violation. But once there's any discussion about it, that's where the violation comes in. So the Attorney General has interpreted that even discussion of the facts in the article becomes a discussion. So let's say you forward that article and a board member responds and says, well, I don't think that would ever work here because we just can't afford that. Now that's a discussion, and that's a violation. So just the article would not be a violation. Any response to it from the board members to a quorum is going to be considered a violation. Now you could take that article and just respond to one member and say, I think we should propose this, and you haven't committed a violation. Once you add that third member to that discussion, now you're in the danger zone.
So a reply all saying, thank you, that was really nice for you to send this. That's not an issue, but a reply all saying hey, this is a great idea, let's make this happen, that's a problem.
Right. I mean, we could defend the thank you for sending this, but my advice is don't reply to anything like that. The temptation can, without even thinking about it. That's the way we communicate now. And hitting the reply to all, if you do that, is going to be a problem. But just to thank you for sending this, we'd be able to defend that. There's no discussion there. That's just a courtesy.
Rob?
Yeah.
Or Layla. So what I've done in the past, if it's something that I really think is a good article, I'll send it to staff to send out to everybody, so the communication goes back to staff and not to me. And then I try not to send anything to all of you at all, because it's too comfortable to just hit reply all, especially when we have communications where we all get the same email. Sometimes I've seen board members forward their response, especially if it's like the president, forward their response to staff, and then staff says, the president, whoever miscounts has responded this way, FYI. So that's the FYI, and then it goes back to staff. And I just don't think it's good in general, just because it's very easy to forget that we're all on the same thread all the time. And so even with the communications that go from staff, I would say to get in the habit of the staff to put all of us in a blind copy. So then the only option we have to respond to is other TUSD staff members and not each other. It's just too easy. You just, even without even thinking about it, or you say something like the item comes up for the agenda. It's like, ooh, is this that article that you sent to all of us? Now people are going to be like, ooh, you guys are talking behind the scenes. it's very easy to jump to that conclusion. So I would say, even if it's a nice kind of, just as an FYI article, that it comes from the superintendent, or we can send it to staff to send out to us. Like, can you please share this with the rest of the board? That's pretty common. Just FYI, just because it's happened too many times where people forget.
Rob, can you talk here about, because I think it's a really good suggestion that Ms. Grijalva made, because there's so many things I'd like to share, but I don't. So I'm going to start using that and sending it to admin. But don't worry, I won't bombard all y'all. But can you talk about walking quorum or daisy chain in this scenario and what that might look like?
So, and I was actually going to mention that. So if, let's say that, and that's somewhat of a different kind of scenario, but we can talk about that. So let's say that, so each of you has a communication line with each other, right? So if Dr. Gravois-Shaw, speaks on an issue with Ms. Shaw, and then Ms. Shaw goes to Ms. Counts and says, Dr. Gravois-Shaw, he's not in the conversation, but she says, Dr. Gravois-Shaw and I support this thing. Now you have basically created a quorum, even though it's not all in the same moment. That is a violation to basically be the little butterfly going from one to the other. Now, Dr. Trujillo can get involved in that issue as well. So he has his one-on-one meetings with you, and he has to be careful about making sure that he doesn't discuss with each of you in your one-on-ones what two others think about something. Because it's not just board members that can be get in trouble for this. It's anybody. Members of the public can be hit on this too if they intentionally split you all up and get basically create a quorum with a chain like that. So Dr. Trujillo has to be careful when he has his one-on-ones and you too. If you ask Dr. Trujillo, to ask two other members what they think and get back to you, then you've all violated the open meeting law by doing that. So you have to be. I know it is a restriction on communication for you, and it makes it tough to get some things done and even consider have a good product to vote on when you get to a board meeting, when you can't have these conversations like a normal group of people would do. But that's the law. It's a law here. It's the law in all the states that I've been in. Same issue.
I have a question, Mr. Ross. What if we are repeating information that was spoken at like a prior public meeting, either to another board member or to the public? Like if we just repeat something that was already said in a previous meeting, like, saying that the members feel this way or whatever, if it's already public knowledge, are we creating a violation there?
A good question. If it's something that may come before the board, then if you're talking about it with a total of 3 people, even if it's you're repeating something, if it's still going to come before the board or may come before the board, then that could be a violation. So I would avoid that. That kind of brings me to my next scenario, which is the interview. So let's say that Mr. Halva goes on a local TV for an interview, and that interview has everybody knew that was going to happen. It's on a particular issue, and all the board members are watching, and Mr. Halva makes statements about whether she supports a particular action or not that the board is going to take in the next meeting. Is that a violation? Anybody have a thought on that one?
So I'll give the answer then. That is not a violation. So you all have your rights to make statements about your opinions and your thoughts, and you as long as you're not directing the communication to a quorum of the board. I mean, that interview would be something for the entire community, and you are free to express your opinions and your thoughts in that way. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky, which is the tweet. So let's say that that a board member tweets, "Come to the board meeting on next Tuesday," and you've got all the other board members who follow you on Twitter. So, is there a violation there? Just come to the board meeting. Okay. What if the tweet is, "Come to the board meeting on Tuesday, where we will be taking up whether or not to open school in March." Okay. Now, what about liking that tweet? So let's say that that a board member does a like on that tweet. You see a violation there?
I think it can get sticky. Like if you're putting your opinion, like, come to where we're going to talk about this thing that I support, I hope you show up, and then 3 board members like it, I think that shows that there's some planning going on. Not obvious, but it could be considered that.
You're absolutely right, Ms. Counts. It gets sticky. So if the tweet is, "I plan to vote on item 3B at the meeting on Tuesday," and board members like that tweet, that is probably it definitely is a violation with similar statutory language in California. So it probably would be here too. Especially, it hasn't been addressed formally by the Attorney General, but if it came up before the AG here on a complaint, that would likely be a violation. So once you get into that realm of proposing legal action, then your likes are considered to be a statement. So now you've got a quorum proposing legal action outside of a meeting. So that's the world we're living in now, and California is the first to take it up officially, and they came up with that decision, and they're scrambling in California on that right now.
So unrelated to board business, I'm liking, everyone's liking my posts on my kids and people are commenting, not an issue, but it has to be related to board business for it to be a problem.
Right. It has to be, if it's something that is or may come before the board, and I hope that your children never come before the board on board business, except for good things like, call the audience.
Your children are very cute though. So if I do a heart on them, you put it out there. It's your fault.
How about if I'm liking or commenting on, Ms. Shaw doing Love of Reading Week at a school, and this is a great book. I'm glad you read that. Is that something that's an issue?
I could defend that if the tweet contains, we should expand Love of Reading Week, and you like that, then that could potentially be a problem.
Okay.
So
see the difference between those?
When you make a statement either for or against something that is on an agenda, or even could become an agenda, if you're making a statement for or against something, then the like would be considered communication.
Even if it's not for or against, and it's just a discussion of it, like you're pointing out the pluses and minuses. Now that's a discussion, so it's not just whether you're in favor of or against it, which that's more of an issue when it comes to being involved, using district resources to influence an election. We're talking about even just discussion. So even if you haven't made up your mind and you're just laying out pros and cons,
that would be considered a discussion. If it's something that is board business or could be board business, then that could be a violation. So you don't even have to take a position, but even just saying, boy, this is a complex issue, there's this and there's that, and you don't even come down on a side.
Yeah.
That's a potential. Okay, next slide, please. So,
Rob, real quick,
yes.
I just because it's happened before, there are groups of people like educators for whoever, or Tucson education, whatever, where they'll try to loop us all into one Facebook group. If you notice that we're all in the same group, leave the group, because it's happened to us where we had Phoenix, a Phoenix organization. It was an education organization, pro public education, all good stuff. And then we all realized that we were all commenting, and I'm like, hey, that's one board member, that's number 2, and I'm number 3. So if for those groups, I will always opt out, even when people, because they'll do it, because we're all on Facebook, they'll ask us all the same question in a private message. So they'll put 3 or 4 of us on one message, or say, I already talked to blah, 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 and then send the message to the other 2, like in Messenger or Insta. I always say, I can't respond. Like, here's my email, communicate with me that way. Or, don't reply to those, because now we know how we all feel about a certain issue that could come before the board.
Can I ask a scenario question, Rob? So say there's a situation where we need to advocate on behalf of the school district with the county board, whether it's, regarding the health department, whether it's regarding, some property issue or something, or just some kind of collaboration between the county government and our school district. Now that we have one of our governing board members also a supervisor of the county, how does it work in terms of our advocacy with the county board if we needed to speak with different supervisors to advocate on issues?
Okay, so the scenario is that you want to contact your counterparts in county government to influence whatever action that they might take that it's in the benefit of the district. That's not a violation, but it does make it a little bit more complicated when you have, if let's say 2 of you talk with Ms. Grijalva. Now that I would consider that to be a difficult open meeting law situation, because you're talking about board business and you've got a quorum. So you just have to be careful about those situations where, anytime 3 of you are together, regardless of what the, one of you is doing for another activity, if it's board business, then it's got to be done in public.
Right. So for example, this, this county board supervisors and their work with the county health department, we're talking about vaccination issues, where if, I'm talking to Ms. Grijalva about, what's going on with vaccinations and her supervision of the county health department, because of her role as a supervisor, even if it affects, TUSD issues, she can only talk about that in her role as a supervisor with only one governing board member, or because it is her role as supervisor, there's a different expectation in terms of open meeting laws. Just trying to get clarification on what we can advocate with Ms. Grijalva as a Pima County supervisor, what we can and can't do with her that we can do with the other Pima County's other 4 Pima County supervisors.
What I would say you should avoid in that situation is having 2 of you talking with Ms. Grijalva or having a communication with Ms. Grijalva about that. It doesn't matter if she's on the board of supervisors or is an employee. It's anytime that there's a total of 3 of you having a communication about something that is related to board business, then there's a risk there of a violation. Mm-hmm. So that is something you're going to have to keep in mind if there are crossover issues. But that, like I said, that could apply if a board member works in any organization that has some relationship to board business, then in their other life, then you're going to have to be aware that anytime three of you get together to talk about it, that there's a potential for violation.
Yeah, I would say in general that conversation wouldn't happen with three of us anyway, regardless of what position any one of us have. So let's say where there's a grant or whatever that SAFE is putting out, and I want to talk to you about that. I can talk to you about that, but I wouldn't bring another person because there's three of us anyway. The only thing that I would say is sort of that daisy chain where, like, if you talk to another Pima County Board of Supervisor and you come and tell me, well, they're supportive of it, then that's where it gets a little funky because you don't know if I've talked to somebody. So in general, for any of our communications with each other, with board business, I would say, even if you've only talked to one person, that's sort of where you're done. Like if Ravi calls me about a board agenda item that I'm like, I really want to do this thing and I really want to push for this, and I would really, if it comes up, can you support that? I can't talk to anybody else about that item. Like, we're done. So just so you know, in general, and so the Board of Supervisor issue, or it's the same with any other boards that you guys are a part of. It's like we're all involved in the community, which is all a really good thing. We just don't ever get together, three of us. That's it. In 2 years we can. If I'm not on the board, then we're good. We can all get together before. Well, at least two of you and me.
Okay, but now you could do it if you follow this. Give notice of a meeting, notice to the public and members of the public body. And the notice has to say where and when the meeting is. Next slide, please. And you need to have, as you know, have a posted agenda, not just the notice of when the meeting is, but the agenda, which specifically lists the items that are discussed or decided. The agenda should be in plain language, and I know particularly in this business of education, there are a lot of acronyms and terms of art that sometimes we as staff don't think about, and we have to be careful to make sure that we kind of take that person on the street test. Would somebody who just picks this up understand what we're going to be talking about in a board meeting and decide whether or not they want to come or observe or make a statement to the board or whatever. And we haven't had to deal with this too much because this board has been pretty good about staying on topic. But if you go off the agenda topic too far, then that could be a violation, and the consequence of that is a violation. But if it's intentional, like, I'm going to say that this is the agenda item, but I really want to talk about this other thing, and that's shown, then that could be a significant violation. And of course, any vote you take on that off agenda topic would be null and void. That's kind of the consequence from a board operation perspective. So if you had on the agenda the student code of conduct, and as part of that discussion you went into teacher contracts, any vote on the teacher contract would be null and void. Next slide, please. I know we got just a couple minutes before the next topic. Okay, so in addition to your agenda, the open meeting law requires minutes, and they can be recorded or written. We in this district have both. And one of those needs to be available to the public within 3 working days. And we have a pretty good system here of posting the recording on the website within 3 days. So the public has that. And we also now do the board actions, and board docs, I think, has been helpful in that. We can get that out pretty quick. When you have an executive session, those minutes remain confidential. The only way they can be obtained is from is to the Attorney General if there's a complaint or if there's a subpoena for them. Other board members can also see them, but they can't disclose them. So if the Attorney General has said, let's say Ms. Grijalva can't attend an executive session, but she wants to know what the minutes say about what was discussed, she's able to see those, but nobody can redisclose them. Next slide, please.
Rob, did you already talk about executive session confidentiality?
Nope, that's we can go to that since we just have a couple minutes if you want to talk about that for a few minutes.
Well, just that, I mean, it is so strict that anything that is said in executive session I say can't even be hinted at outside of executive session.
That's true. So and you always, not to disclose anything that's in executive session, but you always give an announcement at the beginning of executive session that the contents and the discussions are to remain confidential and can't be disclosed to anyone. And that warning is something that is best practice to put on the record, so that everybody knows that anything that happens after this point stays in this room.
So I'm thinking about negotiations and how we talk a lot about contracts and executive session, or let's just stick with employee negotiations, that we can't go out and even give hints, say then we're going to meet with TEA representatives or this community group or that community group. We can't even hint at, well, I believe, Dr. Ravi feels this way, or Ms. Grijalva, I think is leaning this way. Like, that to me, that's hinting. And I don't know, what are your thoughts on that and the line?
Yeah, if the source of that sense of what a board member was thinking came from an executive session discussion, then that would be a violation of the open meeting law. So you're right that any hinting at that is just asking for trouble. Now, you have on, the executive session agenda is public. So the topic is public, and you can say we're going to discuss negotiations in an executive session, but that's pretty much all you can say. That's the public part of it. If you disclose any of that discussion, then that is a violation. Now, you may in your executive session, you may review public documents, publicly accessible documents. You can disclose what's in those documents because they're public. What you can't disclose is any of the discussion that you had about those documents to anyone. Does that make sense?
So,
okay.
I have a question. I think it goes back more towards that interview. Say Ms. Grijalva and I write a joint op-ed on our love of the arts and how we're both hoping to invest in, music education or whatever in this upcoming year. Can Ms. Shaw or another board member then talk about that public that op-ed, that public information, or that interview that was given by two, when she's talking to a community group? So we'll just say Ms. Shaw would say, I know Ms. from the op-ed that came out last week, I know Ms. Grijalva and Ms. Counts are in support of this. And what's the line there?
Yeah, I think Ms. Shaw actually kind of hinted at that scenario. That the interview itself is not directed at board members, right? That's not a discussion to board members. That's a discussion. That's communication directed to the public. So that's not a problem. If Ms. Shaw says, I read that op-ed, that joint op-ed, and that makes three of us.
Okay.
That would not be a violation, because the communication was not among three of you. The communication was two to the public and one to another group of public.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
So, yeah, I know it's kind of it's like a logic game, right? Mm-hmm. And you have to think about, who am I communicating to? Is it to and among a quorum?
Mm-hmm. And where I've found myself kind of getting a little bit foggy on the whole situation is, say I'm meeting with a community group and I refer to something that two other board members had said in last week's board meeting in support of something, or, you know, like, oh, well, they did say that they support that at the last board meeting. So I think that, and so it's the same thing as, say, the op-ed, right? Because it was discussed in the open meeting, we can refer to it.
Or in some other, like you said, a public thing like the op-ed.
Not refer to it each other, but with other groups. Because that happens a lot, I think, in board work, where you're just meeting with different people and you're talking about issues. And so I do find myself referring to things that have already been said publicly often.
So the line really is, are you directing the communication to a quorum or among a quorum? And, you know, like I said, you all have the right and the obligation, I would say, to communicate with the community. And, you know, you shouldn't be, you should not be excluded from recognizing those public statements. It's when you're directing those communications to each other, that's when the trouble will come into the open meeting law. I know we're a few minutes over. I really would like to do the next level of this course at some point in the future. So I do have a bunch of more scenarios, and I'm sure that you all will have some from your experience too. So feel free to call, email, text me questions you have as they come up on this, on open meeting law or public records or anything else. Happy to provide any information for you that will help you do your unpaid job that probably takes half of your life.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Rob. That was really helpful. I asked for this presentation at our Pima County Board of Supervisors. I think you should come and do this one there too.
I'd be happy to. That actually takes a little pressure off your county attorneys. And like I said, next time we do this, we're going to do one of my famous Jeopardy games. We'll do it that way.
That's a fun one. Okay.
Well, thank you, Rob. I thought that was really, really good. And I can see we want to do like a second round, maybe a little bit later, but I think you covered a lot of the important basics. At this point, I want to turn it over to our guest from Arizona School Boards Association. We're proud to have Julie Bacon, tonight's facilitator for best practices in school board governance. And she will be taking us through the rest of the way here. And I've had an opportunity to see her in action at a couple of different ASBA conferences, and I think we're in for a real treat. She does a wonderful job. So with that, I'd like to introduce Ms. Bacon. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited. It would have been more fun to be in Tucson because I see it snowing there, which is really cool. But thanks for having me virtually. I'm excited to get started talking about some of the things that boards have to do. Oh, thank you. There, see, the PowerPoint just magically comes up when you want it. Isn't that awesome? So the first thing I'd like to do, if you could advance the slide, I just want to talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing today. We just want to set the stage and talk about what we're going to learn about today. And we'll talk about communication protocols, but first, you can't really do communication protocols without roles and responsibilities. So we're going to start with roles and responsibilities and go from there. And those of you new board members who went to new board member orientation, this will seem familiar, but it's always good to have a refresher on some of these things. And then we'll just talk about future plans. So the next slide, please. And so I would love to do introductions because a number of you are new and I have met some of you, but not all of you. So the first thing I want to do is introduce myself. So my name is Julie Bacon. I am a leadership development specialist for the Arizona School Boards Association. I'm also a school board member in my 11th year serving the Paradise Valley Unified School District up here in Phoenix. Pretty diverse school district, about 30,000 students. So
I sit where you sit some nights in terms of being a board member. And so I'm really pleased to be here. But I would like each of you also to introduce yourselves, your name, how long you've been on the board, and 2 words that describe your current feelings about your board service. So who wants to go first?
I can go first.
Great, thank you.
My name is Layla Counts. I am going on my, oh my gosh, I lose track of time. It's my 2nd year, my 3rd year, going on my 3rd year with TUSD. I'm a TUSD parent. I'm an early childhood educator and do a lot of different work in social emotional health of children in the community. What were the 2 words?
What 2 words describe your current feelings about board service?
I have to say I feel invigorated. I have a lot of leadership experience, and I think the kindness of my fellow board members appointing and voting me in as president has reinvigorated me. It's been tough this past year with COVID and just technology issues and all of that. So I would say reinvigorated and excited for the next year.
Great, thank you. Who wants to go next?
I'll go.
Okay.
I'm Adelita Grijalva. Hi, Julie. Thanks for coming. I've been on the TUSD board for 19 years, and I'm working for Pima County as a Pima County supervisor. So weird because I go to my default of my job that I've been at for 25 years before this one in juvenile diversion. So that work is really important to me. Restorative practices, dealing with racial discrimination, all of those things have been everything I've done my whole life. So I'm doing that in another role. And how I'm feeling about board service is really excited, and I'm very honored.
Great, thank you.
I'll go
next.
Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ravi Gravoy Shah. I've been on the board for a few weeks now. I'm a family physician and CEO of SAFE, a local nonprofit here, the Southern Arizona AIDS Foundation. Also a TUSD parent, as all of us are. And I think the 2 words I would say would be humbling at just the sheer importance of the work that we're doing and the discussions that we're having. And I would say excited as well about the opportunities to really improve things for my daughter and all the kids here at TUSD.
Great, thank you.
I'll go.
Okay.
Hi, Julie. I'm Natalie Luna Rose. I have been on the board for 3 weeks. In my other life, I am the Communications and Outreach Manager for the Arizona Center for Disability Law, a local nonprofit that works for the rights on behalf of people with disabilities. But I do have communications experience with our previous school district, Vail School District, and various other public entities. And I am also a TUSD parent. And the words that I'm excited, I think that's kind of an overwhelming thing. I think, and also a sense of responsibility to the community and our teachers and our kids.
Great, thank you.
I guess I'm the last person to go. Hey, everybody, I'm Sadie Shaw. New member as well, so been on the board for a few weeks now, and it's been a roller coaster. And so I guess the 2 words that I would say describe my current feelings are I'm inspired to do well in these 4 years. And I don't really have another word. I just am inspired to really take this opportunity and make sure that we steward the district in a way that is going to bring about real important change.
Great, thank you so much. So I have to tell you that you are a unique board because I've done this little exercise, 2 words to describe board service with a lot of other boards in January, and almost none of them said excited. They're more frustrated, stressed out, overwhelmed. So those are just some of the things that I've been hearing. So this is a great day for Tucson Unified. Got 5 new board members with a huge amount of diverse experience, which is so exciting for the school district and for this board and for your students. So thank you for sharing all of that. What we do next is we do these training norms and expectations. We talk about this with every group that we train at ASBA. Be truthful and honest, actively listen without judgment, seek to understand the perspective of others, and actively participate. And that is going to be really important as we get into this work because there are a lot of things that the board and the superintendent are going to discuss and really hash out as we go through this. Actively participate, everyone brings value, and that is really the nexus of governing boards, everyone having their opinions and sharing it and coming to consensus around stuff. Ask clarifying questions if something doesn't make sense or you're not sure what's being said. Assume positive intent of everybody always. We're all here to do good, and just be respectful in tone and manner. So is there anything else that I have missed in these training norms and expectations that any of you would like to add to it? I don't see any, everyone's kind of shaking their head no. So I'm just going to keep on going then. So if we can go to the next slide. So the next slide is roles and responsibilities. We'll talk a little bit about the work that the boards do and the responsibilities of both the superintendent and the governing board. If we go to the next slide. So this slide is one of our things that we have boards do when we're in person, actually write it down. But, how does your board rate? So just want you kind of read through this, see if anything jumps out at you that we can talk about before we start getting into the content of roles and responsibilities.
I can see ones that I'm probably guilty of.
Okay.
And ones where I think this new board is already doing a really good job of. And then some areas where I think we're kind of right in the middle and have room for improvement.
Great. Anybody else?
I think 60% of this board is brand new, and I think we really have a chance to really lead the district in a different, in a way that really makes sense. And not that previous boards had done anything that didn't make sense, but I think we have a fresh start here, and to really make sure that we're working together to move things forward.
Yeah, thank you for, I was thinking that in my head just as you said it. Some of you may not know if you're doing these things or not doing these things because you haven't been on the board that long.
Yeah, so. I would say that there are things here that definitely board members have done, not this board. And so it's great for us to talk about this stuff now, because sometimes you don't even realize that you're micromanaging until, you start talking about what micromanaging is, and then you sit there and reflect. And I'm kind of like Layla. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I've done a couple of these things that I know I shouldn't have done, but in the past, I think it's important for us to get the training, and so I'm appreciative that we're doing that now.
Yeah, great. Yes, Dr. Trujillo.
Yeah, just a note on number one, we have a really great strategic plan process that just got upended by COVID. We have a really dynamic facilitator community group we had put together. We have a steering committee, and just COVID just really upended us. So that was work that we're picking up now as we start to come out. And I think just like every other school district that you've probably worked with, several key initiatives were upended by COVID-19 and the closure of our schools. Just wanted to mention.
Yep. And I think that is absolutely true. It's true in the district that I serve in. We were in the middle of strategic planning, and it just had to stop because there were too many other really emergent things that had to be taken care of. And I know I have recognized in myself during times of COVID that I am probably bordering on micromanaging more than I normally would. And I think it's just because I'm not a healthcare professional, which, I mean, bless you that you have a physician on your board. I would pay money for that, honestly, especially during times like this. But I'm so uncertain of what the implications of COVID were that I probably have micromanaged a little bit more than I normally would. So this is just kind of food for thought, and we'll keep on going. If we can get the next slide. So the next slide talks about this really is the 8 characteristics of effective school boards. And this is a research done by a couple of researchers who looked at numerous studies that have been done about school board governance and school board service, and came up with 8 different characteristics of boards that showed high student achievement. So that's what this looks like. So you're committing to a vision of high expectations, quality instruction, and you have clear policies and practices. You have strong shared beliefs and values about what's possible for students and their ability to learn, and the system and its ability to teach. So this is where we always talk about, if every adult in the system believes every student can learn, the possibilities are limitless. So that is just everyone having that belief. You're accountability driven, so you're spending less time on operational issues and more time focused on policies to improve student achievement. You have a collaborative relationship with staff, community, and a strong communication structure to inform and engage both internal and external stakeholders, and in setting and achieving goals. So the process that you talked about in terms of your strategic plan sounds like it's right. That's right there. You're doing that in that scenario. So that's great. You're data savvy. You're embracing and monitoring data, even when it's negative. That being the most difficult part of being on a board, I think, is when you have to lay things bare and tell people you're not doing as well in certain aspects of the functioning of the district than you want to, and drive it for continuous improvement. Align and sustain resources, such as professional development, to meet district goals. And I would say it's not just professional development, but really your budget should align with your strategic goals and your strategic plan. Your budget priorities should align with that. So that's just thinking about how are we spending money, where are we spending money, and not just money, but time, resources, commitment, those sorts of things. Lead as a united team with their administrator, each from their respective roles. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that collaborative approach and the trust that you can build is really critical for the success of students in Tucson. And then to take part in team development and training, sometimes with your administrator, to build shared knowledge, values, and commitments. So,
question?
Yeah, please.
So on point number 3, it says accountability driven, spend less time on operational issues and more time focused on policies to improve student achievement. Can you talk about how being accountability driven ties into spending less time on operational issues? Like I don't see the connection right off.
Yeah, so I think what this is talking about is the board is accountable for the student achievement in the district. Like, you are focused on what can we do to improve student achievement, whether it's policy implementation, whether it's program adoption, what are the issues that are in the way, and let's make ourselves accountable to make them not be barriers anymore. So that's what it's talking about. So letting the superintendent do the job of the day-to-day stuff, but you are looking at what's the big picture. How can we implement? How can we have an impact as a board? What can we do from this perspective to make student achievement better than it is?
Okay, thank you.
If that still doesn't make sense.
No, it does. I just feel like probably as a board, side note, and in the future, we might be able to dive into that a little. That might happen naturally if we're continuing with the strategic plan. And I also think that COVID has played a role in, the emergency operational issues. So how do we get back to barriers to student achievement? Because when I'm always thinking of, because I've been in a director role in a lot of my jobs. And so I remember when I was campaigning, people said, well, you sound more like a superintendent than a board member. And so because I see the strategy or the policy and where we want to go as intimately tied to operations and to those operational issues. So for me, it's really hard to separate the two. And I think that that's been my challenge as a board member. I don't know with, Ms. Grijalva, or if that will come up with other board members on their time on the board, but I just find that that it's very hard for me to separate.
I think it's very hard for most board members to separate. It is the fine line that you have to walk, and it's hard to find the balance in that. And sometimes you're not going to find it, and you might, step over the line.
Yeah. I would say that I agree in that, what we try to do is provide safe spaces for our students and our staff. And so when you're talking, especially right now with COVID, I mean, you're talking about how often things are wiped down and where the PPE and like all of these details. But even before this, you're talking about making sure that the technology is available. And so I feel like there is a balance there, because we have to, as board members, know what the condition of the infrastructure is in our district. So, and talking about the policies that would do that makes a lot of sense, but you still have to know, if I pass this policy, how does this affect change? And so that's, I think, where we get into the weeds a little bit. But for the most part, I feel like the boards that, especially recently, that we've been trying to focus more on policy issues and not get into the minutia of everything. Mm-hmm. Like the balance of being on the policy side and the governance versus being the superintendent and staff, it does get a little fuzzy. Yeah.
I noticed Mr. Burke was really good at that. And I think it's just something that I'll just need support in. So.
Yeah, I think we all do. And it doesn't mean you can't know the details of what the policy implementation looks like or the program that's created. It just means you're not diving into it. In terms of, so one of the things that I have always advocated for and been a really strong proponent is the social emotional needs of students. I'm a master's level social worker. I am all about students can't learn if they're hungry, if they're, abused, if they're homeless, if they're, any number of different things that our students face. And so I have had times when I'm like, well, that school has a social worker. Why doesn't this school have a social worker? And really what I should be talking about is where are we, structurally to be able to have those services in our schools. And so I don't need to get into what program the social workers are using to address social emotional issues. But the idea that I have advocated for and would like to see social work or mental health professionals in our sites is still broad enough.
Yeah, that's a good example.
I don't like the color of the playground equipment at the school. Okay, yeah. I mean, your district is so big that you can't get into that. But when I go to remote school districts where there's one school and in a town of, I don't know, less than 1,000 people, that can get really difficult. But it is harder for you and people like me who are in big districts because you don't always know everything. So.
Okay, I don't want to derail the conversation, but I have a question. So,
okay,
if you're seeing the implementation just not being effective in, say, one area, mm-hmm. then I guess you just address that with the superintendent.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'll practice.
And I think it's something that you can address it with the superintendent. When you're doing a performance evaluation of the superintendent, and that really is at the end of the day, that's the place where board members have impact on how the superintendent, manages the day-to-day operations of the school district. So it's not always satisfying way to get it done, but it is definitely the way we should do it. Okay. Anything else? Any other questions, thoughts? Anything you think the board does really well? Something you want to improve on? Okay, I'm going to move on then. Unless, Adelita, I just saw you unmuted, but
no, that's okay.
Okay. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. This slide shows us kind of that board authority and superintendent authority. So the oversight of the management of the district. So you're setting the expectations, the parameters, providing the framework. And then the superintendent is providing the leadership, supervision, and implementation of those things. And so the thing that I like to point out about this graphic is that dotted line in between, and that's obviously intentional because there always is information flowing back and forth. We wouldn't want to put a solid line there because you certainly want to have some communication. But boards are looking at goals and policies. The superintendent then is developing the plans, implementing them, monitoring the progress, and the board's evaluating the results. And I would say that monitor progress, evaluate results, or there can be a little bit of back and forth in there because you certainly would want to, as a board, understand how something that you've implemented how it's progressing, and before you have to make a decision, an evaluation, like a formal evaluation of it. Okay, next slide. You can see that I'm always reaching for my mouse because I'm used to doing my own slides. So I'm always trying to put the slides forward, but I don't have that job today. So here's some kind of side-by-side on board roles and responsibilities. The board sets the direction, the superintendent executes it. The board establishes the structure through policy, the superintendent or his designees implement it. So you can just kind of go down that list and look. There are three things that boards cannot delegate to the superintendent, and that is the adoption of policy, the adoption of a budget, and the supervision of the superintendent. So those are the three things that under state statute cannot be delegated to the superintendent. Now, that doesn't mean that the superintendent doesn't have a role in creating the budget that you adopt. It doesn't mean they don't have a role in creating policy that you adopt, but but no one else can say this is our policy. It has to be the board. Questions about that? Okay, so next slide. Now, I thought I would take us through communication protocols. This is a training that we do very frequently with new board teams, and you are a new board team since you have new board members. And I love this training so much that when we got a new superintendent in my school district, I had Nikki Whaley, who's the other trainer at ASBA, come to our district and do this training, because I think it's so valuable to kind of set the stage, set the expectations, and make sure that everyone understands what the communication is going to look like. So we go to the next slide. So we talk about documented and agreed upon communication practices, and this isn't something we're just going to talk about. When we're done with this, I will put together a summary of what we discussed. And we at ASBA would encourage you to bring that to a public meeting, have conversation about it, so that your community understands that you have protocols, that you have guidelines for your communication. And we believe that it builds trust, promotes understanding, mutual understanding, makes the team collaborative, and reduces that non-productive conflict. We know conflict is okay as long as it's productive. Non-productive conflict gets in the way of boards accomplishing what they need to accomplish. So, and that information is from the NSBA, the National School Boards Association, Key Works of School Boards. So if we could go to the next slide. We're just going to jump right into these communication protocols, and it will require you to tell me what's happening now, and see if there's any decision or conversation about wanting to change that. So, does the board receive regular communication from the superintendent? And if so, how often?
We do, and I would say it's weekly. Dr. Trujillo's very open with the board. Just in my 3 weeks on the board, I can say that he's been very responsive.
Great. So weekly, is that on a specific day, or is it when stuff comes up, or how do you do that, Dr. Trujillo?
I'm sorry, I'll let him speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the board members get a comprehensive board advisory report every other week. And then we also, anything that has the potential to get media coverage, has the potential to generate any concerns with our employee associations or a potential for litigation. They'll get a text message also for sort of one-off, something like heads up, no surprises, this could attract some media attention. Mm-hmm. They'll get a formal board advisory report every other week. And then we meet personally 60 to 90 minutes to review agendas just before every board meeting. Every board member gets a one-on-one meeting to review the agendas. And then sometimes there's one-off meetings as requested by each board member. If a particular board member wants to learn a little more about a certain area of the district, we'll facilitate meetings with curriculum and instruction leadership, employee relations leadership. I know Dr. Gravoy-Shaw did a really good job of connecting with our team, and we helped him schedule those meetings. So that's kind of our communication right now in terms of frequency.
Great, thank you. Any thoughts about that from board members? Does that seem reasonable, good? Does it give you enough information? Any changes needed to that?
I think the level of communication is good. I feel that I'm able to put together a relationship or establish a relationship with my superintendent because how often we're communicating, but it's not overdone, and the communication is effective and not trite, and is at its interval where there's important issues to discuss.
Great. Anybody else? Okay. So it sounds like you've got a great process for that. The one thing that there are times that we see some division in boards if there's the impression that one member or a number of members are getting more information from the superintendent than others. So what we would like to always say is that one member's request for additional information results in all members receiving or having the same access to that information. It's just important that everyone when you're walking into a public meeting, you have all the information that everyone else has. And then any special communications are done for all board members. So that's just something we think is really important to reduce that conflict and have people coming to meetings feeling like they know something I don't know. And so thumbs up on that, everybody? Good? Okay, great. Then if we could go to the next slide. So here are some shared agreements that we ask board members and the superintendent to talk about and to agree to. So you treat each other with respect, treat the staff with respect. Superintendent will acknowledge feedback shared by board members and confirm issues will be addressed. The superintendent will respect and acknowledge the perspectives of board members as representatives of the community. And then this phrase that we have and we talk about a lot is support, not surprises. So, and that goes both ways. You don't want board members to, do a gotcha moment in a meeting, but you also don't want board members to come to meetings not prepared by the superintendent. So support, not surprises is what we recommend at all times. So everybody good with that one? If you could just kind of give me a head shake, that'd be great. Okay, thanks. And then the next slide. So this is emergency communication protocols, and this looks different in every school district because what an emergency is in Tucson Unified is very different than probably what an emergency is in a small district, in a small rural community. So what does that look like? Are there kinds of levels? Do we have a sense of when the superintendent's like, yep, I need to let the board members know this? And I think you talked about a little bit in terms of, the one-off kind of communication, but I didn't know if there was something like if you use kind of a framework to think about that. Yeah, Dr. Trujillo.
I'll just say, like, from my perspective, there's 3 levels that I'll use before something gets to we need to call a meeting. And really, the only time that it actually escalated to we need to call a meeting was during the Red for Ed walkout that required us to actually close the district. Right. Emergency meeting on that. But typically, if it's something that they need to know about that might show up either with employee emails. I know that a group of employees might be upset about something, or parents. It might get to call to the audience. It might get on their radar. I'll just email it, or it'll be included in my every other Monday biweekly report. If something is actually imminently going to hit the press, they might get a request for an interview about it. They might read something about it. It might show up on a blog or in the news or in the media. That's a text message notification. Sometimes if there's an employee action or we have to initiate an investigation, I'll give them very minimal details. Such and such happened at this school. Such and such was placed on administrative leave, and that's it. Just so they know if something breaks in the media that there was already a personnel action, they're already out on leave. So the third tier would be if they need to take action on something immediately, like I need authorization to close schools because we don't have the staffing. And we ran into that, of course, during Red for Ed, where we had to take some action. Luckily, through the COVID-19 pandemic, we've had naturally occurring board meetings where we built in an action item at every single board meeting, kind of anticipating that once we hit March and we had to close the district, like every board meeting has a COVID-19 item that gives the board the flexibility pretty much every other week to do something related to COVID-19. So that's kind of our structure right now. Is I save the emergency meeting for, like, they need to take immediate action that's beyond my realm, and we'll work with the board president to bring them together for that.
Mm-hmm. So the other thing that comes to mind is the school that doesn't have air conditioning, or that's in a lockdown, that, you know, those kinds of safety emergencies that happen. You know, if I'm in a small district, if a kid falls on the playground and breaks their arm, those board members want to know. But that's certainly not reasonable in a district your size. So I don't know if there's that piece that you have some.
Yeah, you're right, Julie. They will get a notification of when there's an AC system, or there's an HVAC tower down, or there's a boiler down, because I know they're going to get bombarded with parental concerns. So that's in the category of hitting media or angering parents, all that, you know, AC, boilers. I know Ms. Grijalva really did a great job working with me a few years ago when Hollinger, when their AC went down. I knew I needed to get something out because that's a very vocal community. And she was able to kind of help and go out and address a lot of the questions. That was back before COVID, where you could actually have in person and address questions. Yeah. So yeah, you're absolutely right that those mechanical failures will also generate a need for me to get them informed.
Okay, great. If we go to the next slide, that'd be great. And so it sounds like for the most part, you or your office, Dr. Trujillo, are doing the notification of the board members. And there may be times in this scenario when the superintendent is not available. A board member has a question, wants an update. Who is the person they should call if you are not available, Dr. Trujillo?
Yeah, so if I'm not available and they need an update, we have a couple of different options. So right now, a lot of information flows through the board office with our coordinator for staff services, Yolanda, who puts this meeting together. She pretty much will know what the superintendent's office knows. So she's kind of there as backup. I also have General Counsel, Mr. Ross, who's to provide some immediate on the ground reports that if board members need some additional information, he's kind of a backup because we both report to all 5 board members.
Yeah. So does this work for everybody? Is there anything board members want to add or talk about with this process? Sounds like it's going pretty smoothly. Good deal. All right. You guys are easy. This is going to be quick. Okay. So let's go to the next slide. Questions about district operations. And this is something that, you know, lots of districts have different ways of doing this. So if a board member has a question, they go by a school, they see something that they're curious about, who do they call? Who do they email?
I just contact Gabe, Dr. Trujillo.
Okay.
And that's a specific legal question, then sometimes I will CC Dr. Trujillo and ask Rob, our general counsel.
Mm-hmm. And is that your preference, Dr. Trujillo?
Yeah, if there's legal, they will routinely just kind of copy me, and it's usually just a direct question for Rob. If it's something logistical, they will go for Yolanda, who coordinates a lot of the scheduling and the logistics of the board office. And I think all 5 of them just really do a great job right now of bringing things to my attention. If somebody's disgruntled, they do a good job of acknowledging the complaint, or whether it's on the phone or on email. and then giving us an opportunity to look at it. I know once I receive their feedback or the concern, if it's an employee that's upset about something, then we have an employee relations director who's kind of, she doesn't report to any of the operational wings, so she maintains sort of an independent investigator role, kind of like our internal auditor. And she's anything that has to do with relationships or working conditions. So we'll route it to employee relations. And then once employee relations look at it, I try to follow up with the board member to say, okay, here's what happened. We looked at it. We do a lot of business with our parents of students with disabilities and our exceptional ed program. That's probably our most frequent area of concern, where employees, a lot of parents will contact board members with concerns about services. We have an ombuds person who's also sort of an independent auditor, if you will. She'll look at the complaint and, kind of where the district may have fallen short, and how we can remedy the situation. So I'll route it to an ombuds person. Outside of that, we will get it to the office of a regional assistant superintendent, or my team will call the school directly if we can save time. I think we're kind of the de facto center for Tucson High because we're so close. So usually Nick or Sarah are able to just call right into Tucson High and get help for any parent. So that's kind of the structure of how we route once board members send us the concerns or the complaints. I view our job is to kind of move the levers of the district for them, because they work. I mean, they're parents, they've got kids, they've got full-time jobs. I try not to put them in a spot where they have to figure out, okay, I got this parent complaint, now who do I need to contact about it? So that's kind of my job, is to move those levers for them and then get back to them.
I have a question for Gabe, actually. So on little things, say facilities, and I'm wondering if we could get a power washer on this campus or something. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll email the facilities board and I will direct the question to, or I'm not facilities board, I'm sorry, facilities director. And I'll direct the question to both Gabe and the director. And I know 2 years ago that was fine. I'm wondering if that system still works for Gabe, or if we want to just go to strictly, I remember in the beginning you said if you CC me on there so I know what's going on, then that's fine. So I'm just wondering if that's still working, because I do that with either facilities or, if I have an HR question about, something small. Does that work?
I like the CC, that works. Tracy Winfield is a fantastic team member. She just makes it happen. Stuff like getting a power washer out, getting supplies to schools. Schools ran out of toilet paper, schools run out of paper towels. Tracy really makes a lot happen. And so I think just kind of CCing me on that. And there's some times that I might get CC'd on something to Tracy that's, by the time I touch base with her, it's already taken care of. So it just saves a lot of time. So
okay. So it still works for little things.
Stuff. Yep.
So my question is, for the new members, do you understand this process? I mean, is it something that you think if you had a concern, you would know what to do with it? Or would you need to call the board office to figure out, what do I do with this? How do I figure it out? I mean, do you know what that looks like? Because there's a lot of layers, it sounds like.
I mean, I do feel like absolutely Dr. Trujillo is the main source as we figure out, but I imagine Ms. Counts or Ms. Grijalva, because they've already served for a while, they already have a relationship with other departments, so they might, like Ms. Counts said, reach out to a department and CC Dr. Trujillo in an email, but perhaps they might not. And so I'm just are we encouraged to always CC Dr. Trujillo, or are we able to have agency and just have conversations with different departments without CCing Dr. Trujillo?
So that's a great question, and I think one that needs answered for new members. So thank you for bringing that up.
No, that's a great question. I would prefer to be in the know because I got to know like what's been communicated. And it kind of ties back to all board members having the same information. So I need to make sure that everybody's kind of in the know in terms of what our team is working on. My first default is always to try to move the levers for the board member. Like my job is if the board member wants to get something done that in a particular area, you know, let's say operations, let's say we've got some concerns about, you know, gum stains. A board member might have visited Choya or Pueblo or Saguaro, and they're concerned about the gum stains all over the blacktop or all over the cement. And there's like, how often are we power washing? And when can we get some power washer? This looks disgusting. So my job is not to put them through the layers. My job is, okay, that's Sarah and Nick. Let's get up with Tracy Winfield. Let's get a schedule. Let's get some before and after pics and then kind of follow up with them. Because I view it as like that sort of first slide where my job is sort of the logistical and to try to get in there and have my team really take ownership of that so they can try to stay as much as they can in the policy realm. Now, fast forward to if they're in the district for many years and they've developed all these relationships. Yeah, like I can say like Mrs. Grijalva, who knows Tracy Winfield, she might just shoot the email to Tracy and I'm CC'd on it. So I still know what's going on. So I can kind of keep everybody in the loop. So I think that's, for me, more the reason to kind of keep us clued in.
Can I chime in real quick? So I've worked with a lot of different superintendents. There are some that really want everything to go directly to them. So even if I have a relationship with someone, I know them pretty well, I tend to go through the superintendent, mostly because if it's an issue at one school, it's probably a systemic issue. So I'm complaining about something at Choya, but Ms. Counts goes to Sabino and sees the same problem. Dr. Trujillo needs to know that that is something that has to be, like, we have to start changing the maintenance on those things. So it's not just responding to, I want you to fix this one problem for me. It's like a systemic one. And even though I do have relationships with a lot of people in the district, I think everyone will tell you, I rarely go directly that way unless Dr. Trujillo is not available. I think I've done it one time in recent memory where I called Renee because Dr. Trujillo was in a meeting and I had to press, like I was going to be interviewed in like 10 minutes and I needed a dollar amount. And I'm like, I do not want to give an inaccurate dollar amount. So then I reached out to Renee and she contacted me. But that's it pretty much. I do think that when we start to do those kind of things and start to we don't have a staff. So we don't want to reach out to somebody to try to be helpful and then drop the ball because we get into a meeting that's not our job. There's in TUSD people that will do that. If the ball gets dropped, then that's a different story. So what I tend to do is CC Dr. Trujillo in my response to people when they complain about something pretty major. And then I say, and if you can reach out to me if no one's been in contact with you in 3 business days. So that way, like the loop will come back to me. If someone has dropped the ball, then we know. But for the most part, I haven't had that experience in a really long time where people are like, no one's called me forever. So, and then just remember that the people that contact us tend to know that to contact us. So they'll call more than one of us. So we might each be responding to the same email. And so at least Dr. Trujillo then knows, oh, this person's reached out to all the board members. It's not just this one school. FYI.
I think the other thing that this is, and we haven't really talked about this, but this, we know that boards only have authority when they're in a publicly noticed meeting with a quorum of members. However, you have the perception of power in many different ways. So the idea that a board member is emailing a staff member directly about an issue, even if you're not intending it to seem like you're telling them to do something, the perception of that person may be that. So I think that's the other reason to just kind of be careful about the way you interact with staff, and always keeping the superintendent informed and aware of what is happening. Because again, while you have no individual authority as a board member, you certainly have the perception of power. And employees think about that. So that's just another thing to keep in the back of your mind.
I'm going to ask a follow-up question on that. Like if, for instance, we get forwarded a correspondence between, like, say, a parent and a staff member. Recently this happened, and I asked that staff member for clarification on something that I wasn't sure of. I didn't CC you, Dr. Trio, sorry. But like, can we do that without like CCing Dr. Trujillo, or is it just for clarification of something that we may not know because we're new board members? You know what I mean?
I think the best practice would be, and I can see that Mr. Ross is on this as well, but I think the best practice would be to really refer that to the superintendent so that the superintendent can address the problem. And there's a couple of reasons why. The first one is the board really should be the last stop in a complaint process, because you are the final really arbitrator of issues that affect the district. So if you get involved in a situation, you may remove yourself from being able to vote on it. So I would just be really careful about interacting at all around concerns and complaints, and really use the superintendent to find resolution to that. Now, that doesn't mean you can't listen to a parent. And I think Mr. Ross said earlier, you do have a responsibility to your constituency and the community members to listen, but trying to find that line that you walk between I'm getting too involved and I want to be helpful. So just understanding what that process looks like, and that in terms of some of your policy, you might want to look at the B policies have the board policies, but KE and KEB are two policies that talk about the chain of command with concerns and complaints. So those are a couple of policies, and you might have more than, might be KE, KEB, KEC. It just depends on how your policy manual looks. But to really understand what happens when a parent or a community member has a concern or a complaint about something, so that you can give them that process. You can help them understand the process, start at the lowest level, et cetera. So I don't know if Dr. Trujillo or Mr. Ross have anything else they want to add to that, but that would be my recommendation.
I think you're right on, Julie. I got to kind of step out and kind of put myself in the position of the line employee. And you're absolutely right. Though I personally, if I'm on the CC, I can totally see where the employee on the other end of it is seeing, oh my gosh, it's Trujillo and board member A. Now I got two, because I also am very aware of my effect also. When I'm on an email, and then when it's me and a board member, it could probably be pretty anxiety inducing for the line employee to see that. So versus, kind of things just running through me. So I appreciate you bringing that perspective. I kind of missed that.
Yeah. And if I could jump in there, I mean, you made a really good point about the policies on complaints, because what you don't want as a board member is to become part of the investigation when you have to vote on the result of that investigation at some point down the road. So you can't really be essentially a witness and then be an impartial arbiter of the end result. So thank you for referring to those complaint policies.
Mr. Ross, can you email the board those policies so we can review them tomorrow?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that.
Right. And I do have just a quick comment. Is one of the best pieces of advice I got from another board member when I first started was
because it happens all the time where people are going to be reaching out to you, community members are going to be reaching out to you and wanting help and wanting to kind of jump to the top of the chain of command, and it undermines, and you have to figure out what your message is, because so like, for example, I'll just say, thank you for writing your email. We are going to be looking at all the aspects of this issue, and stay tuned to watch the board meeting or something like that, like kind of a standard response, because it's you will get bombarded, especially in stressful times like with this COVID pandemic. We will just get people that want us to jump the process on their behalf, and it undermines the whole system. So, and for me, it took a little practice on, making sure that the process, well, did you talk to your principal about it? Did you file a complaint, or, that sort of thing, instead of just making sure that they've done the process. Because it happens all the time. We'll get emails about, people wanting us to do something immediately for them.
Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing, when I first became a board member, I kind of developed a 2 or 3 sentence little elevator speech that I did when people came to me with complaints. I want you to understand what my role is as a board member. I don't get involved in the day-to-day operations of the school district. My job is to inform the superintendent of your concern and complaint and ask them to get someone to help you resolve it. So, and I usually added, and if I get too involved, I can't vote on it. And that's not, that's not a place I want to be. That's not a position I want to be in. So, and I think new board members, and maybe some of you are seeing this, you kind of have a target on your back because some people may realize that you don't yet know what this communication policy is, or the complaint procedures, or what Dr. Trujillo would want you to do in these kinds of scenarios. So sometimes you can, new board members are getting a lot of emails and a lot of conversations that may not happen with more veteran and experienced board members.
Julie, that actually happened to me my very first meeting. I received an email from a disgruntled employee who'd already tried to reach out to all of the sitting board members and then tried to get me. And then I found out later, my other colleague who was also new, to, advocate for their position. And you don't realize that it's happening at all. And I remember early on, I would get communications from an employee that forwarded communication with their supervisor. I would get parents that would blind copy me on communications with the principal. And it wasn't, the impression that I got, it wasn't like, hey, by the way, I have this board member on the line and they're, I just want her to understand, whatever it is. It was more trying to influence the decision by having a board member in an email or on a phone call or at a site visit. It's like, can you come and speak to my classroom? And I'm like, oh, sure, I'm happy to do that. Because with my job, I was always talking about the law and that kind of thing. And then I realized while I was there that it was, oh, you want your principal to know that you know me. That's weird. So you just have to sort of feel some of those things out, because sometimes it's like a go around to try to say, don't get on my bad side because I know a board member, when really, great, you know me, but that doesn't matter. I can't do anything unless the 5 of us are in a meeting. But some board members have in the past have tried to use that influence, and I think people, especially people that have been around TUSD for a long time, still sort of try to do that. And so I think it's great to loop in Dr. Trujillo, because we're all kind of new as a team, but I would bet lunch, whenever we can have lunch, that some of you are getting communications from the same people that were trying to lobby me when I first got on the board, or are still. It just happened. They want to get in, they want to work around from whatever the situation was that they're not happy with.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions about that?
I do have a question about when we get correspondence from students. I recently got like 50 emails from Choya High School, and I made sure to reply to every single one of them. But, I'm wondering about policies in regards to talking to students. So if there's anything about that.
Well, I would think especially if they're connecting with you over a concern or a complaint or a problem that they have, I think it would be very similar to what your policy says in those, KE and KEB and the rest of them that have to do with the concern and complaint policy. But I don't know, Dr. Trujillo, what that looks like in terms of, I don't know, student communication. I don't know if that's problematic in any other way that I'm not thinking about.
I think you hit it right on the head, Julie. The minute, for me, the line of demarcation is the minute that the student either makes an allegation of some sort of unprofessional conduct or some sort of a complaint about a service not being rendered or something being wrong, something needing to be corrected, then that becomes my area, right? Then that's a look into this. Let's get it. If it's a student just advocating, and our students are great. If it's a student like writing board member Shaw saying, hey, listen, we really feel like, Choya High School, like we need new stadium lights. We need new LED stadium lights, or we need new equipment. I don't need to be copied on that kind of correspondence. Those are just advocacy emails between elected officials and their constituents that they serve, the stakeholders that they serve. It's only when it gets into the complaint territory or the accusation territory where I would need to be involved. And I think that's the same with community, with employees, that of course the employees are they're gonna advocate, they're gonna lobby, and if they're gonna write board members about advocating for them to consider a new HVAC tower for high school B, that isn't something necessarily I need to be CC'd on. It's just when we cross that territory into complaints or allegations, then I will. Yeah, I absolutely need to be, that should be forwarded to me so that I can, begin an inquiry.
I would also, I got a few of those emails as well, and I really enjoyed them, and I responded back to the students. It was from the Mexican American Studies class at Choya, and I do believe the teacher was CC'd on those, so I felt comfortable. And a lot of them were the students that they were in this class and how much they loved the class. And then something about their school, it seemed like the letter, something about their school that they'd like to see improvement on. And there wasn't anything that I thought was egregious. It was, better drinking fountains, and another student wanted her fellow classmates to have more pride in their campus and pick up trash and those sort of things. So I didn't feel, not that I wouldn't tell Dr. Trujillo, but I didn't feel that they were, anything that was serious enough to maybe warrant that, but I'll keep that in mind for the future.
Yeah, I think the other thing to think about is if you're seeing specific themes, I mean, maybe you get 100 emails about the HVAC tower at a school. Maybe let the superintendent know there's like a movement happening at that school around that issue, even though it's not like necessarily a complaint piece. But I do think notifying the superintendent of themes that you see out of particular parts of your community is valuable, so that he is ready and aware and understands that this may be something he has to address. Does that sound reasonable to everyone? Okay. Okay, anything else? Okay.
Julie, real quick, I do think that it's hard because we're all duly elected to, communicate with constituents, to give feedback, to advocate for different positions. And so it's hard when you hear, well, let's go through Dr. Trujillo. But quite honestly, the reason why we do is because that way he's aware that there's a situation that you've brought to his attention. And if there isn't some action, then he's the only employee that we can hold responsible. So ultimately, he's the one that we have to ask to do these different things. And I do think that it's happened to me too, as, you know, full-time employee. I had a full-time job with 3 children. And if someone were to say, can you follow up on this thing? And talking to this specific person, if I drop the ball, then now we have a really, you know, upset parent or community member, and they're mad at us now because we did drop the ball. It's one thing for us to look at Dr. Trujillo and say, are you following up on those things that I asked you to do? And another thing when people are asking you, hey, did you do all these things? Especially if we don't have any control over it ultimately. Like we can advocate for different things we want. And what I would do is say, okay, now let's look at the custodian schedule. How often are these things cleaned? And we've had like probably more conversations about that than anyone wants to admit, down into the minutia. But quite honestly, it helps because if you have complaints overall about cleanliness, then we have to know what that means. So when someone asks us, we know. But I do think that this one has always been a real weird one for me because people are like, well, what are you doing? I elected you to do what? How are you doing? How are you going to fix it? It's like, that's the difference is I personally can't fix it, but I can advocate for it. I can push for a vote. I can push to change the policy. And sometimes people want things done like right that second. And emergency things should be done that way. But policy changes, unfortunately, take a little bit longer.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, you know, it is your job to communicate with the people who elected you. So don't shy away from that. But, you know, just be mindful of the impact that you have when you're doing that. That would be the only thing I would add. And sometimes it helps to explain, you know, how a board member could be impactful in situations. So if we're talking about like the cleaning schedule, you know, that might require the board to vote differently on a budget allocation. So there are ways that board members can impact that. They just probably can't impact it in the day-to-day. They cannot impact it in the day-to-day. You know, I'm going to tell this custodian to do this. Okay. I think we're ready to move on to the next slide. And so this is with the superintendent and board communications, the shared agreements. Superintendent and board members will be respectful towards staff and board members, should be respectful of the staff's time. And that's something that we can talk about, but the time piece is also something to recognize when you're communicating with employees. Direction is only given at board meetings when a majority of the board votes to give that direction. Board members will remain impartial and share both positive and negative feedback about the district with the superintendent. And board members will reserve judgment and refrain from investigating concerns, instead deferring to the chain of command. And then also support, not surprises. So those are the ones that we're talking about. These are the agreements that we'd like to get a thumbs up on if everyone is okay with these. Okay, great. And that's one thing that I have always been really conscious of is using staff time, because the staff actually has a job and it's not to take care of the board member. So, you know, really being conscious of that when you're at site, when you're interacting with your staff during their regular workday. It's just something to keep in mind. And we will talk about site visits at the end of this, toward the end. So we could go to the next slide. So one of the things that a lot of boards get kind of hung up on is what to do when you get your agenda. And you have questions, you don't know what to do. So we like to kind of talk the whole process through. So the board president meets with the superintendent how far in advance of board meetings to talk about the draft agenda and discuss that process.
So right now, our historical practice that I Mrs. Counts is my fifth board president, and I think with all five, what's really worked is the board president goes first, and getting the board president at least, try to get them at least 7 to 10 days in front of the next board meeting. I'm usually able to get everybody cycled through by at least 4 or 5 days in front of a board meeting. Sometimes because of scheduling, I might meet with somebody that maybe the Friday before the board meeting, worst case scenario, the Monday morning. But usually if I'm in that situation, I'll try to schedule the most senior board member that I know that if I have to do a last minute, they're like usually good to go. With like 20 years in, that's usually Ms. Grijalva. Like if I have to move somebody up further.
Why do you keep highlighting how long I've been here?
It does help like that. If I have
the most senior, I'm like, and technically, yes, I am the most senior. Thank you so much.
The most experienced, right? But I usually will try to, best case scenario, everybody's done usually 4 to 5 days in front of a board meeting, but doesn't always happen. We've got some scheduling. Sometimes it's tough with my scheduling and then with everybody's work schedules, but usually we're able to get everybody in.
Great. And do you use a consent agenda?
We do use a consent agenda, and it's interesting. The board has gone through different iterations of ideology around a consent agenda. So now with the new board, we have a new board that really wants to see the consent agenda used as more of an efficiency tool to really put all of those cyclical items that occur on a month-to-month or a semester so that they can get to more governance with regard to policy and higher impact issues. Previous boards have kind of been the opposite, where they've kind of wanted to see everything on agenda, split it out, do separate votes. And that kind of led to a lot of 12 o'clock, 11:30 meetings because people kept pulling things off of consent or wanting to have separate presentations. So I think now we're back to consent being, I think, the tool that it's meant to be in terms of meeting efficiency and effectiveness. So they'll be a little bit longer. As a rule of practice, I don't put anything on consent that is at or above the governing board threshold. Usually, even if they're okay with it. So case in point, the board just recently approved at its last public meeting, or I think it was December 8th, the yearly contract renewal that's considered for Microsoft, which is the workflow for the district, Microsoft. Even though I know that all of our board members have voted on that before, and I know that it's kind of routine, because it was 600,000, we just scheduled it for action. So as a rule of thumb, I really don't put anything on consent that is at or above the threshold for contracts. We try to at least for the public, give it some discussion, some airtime, and a vote. So the big picture stuff, usually we will take it into action. But if it's smaller and it's cyclical and it occurs on a year to year, we will use consent.
Mm-hmm. Great. Do board members, I mean, you can pull something from the consent agenda. So do you have a process for that? Because do you ask them to notify you a number of days in advance so that you can prepare materials for discussion? How do you do that? And I guess the other question is, do new board members understand what that means to pull something, and do you know how to do that? I guess that would be the beginning of that.
So one of the things I do in board agenda prep is go line item by line item through consent and ask, do you think you're going to pull anything? We can do that now. If I see even one board member has concerns about something on consent in the agenda review process, my job is to pull it and book it as an action item. So I just, even if there's just one that's not comfortable with something, I'll usually book it as action to try to avoid the pulling of something live in a meeting. So that's kind of like my process. For quite some time, it's been a few years that we've had any real surprises with consent. It's definitely been a couple of years since we've had any issues where somebody might, minutes before the meeting, want a presentation, or we're up at the dais and somebody doesn't want to vote. So I don't think we've had that, but that's kind of our current, is during those agenda review meetings is the time where I really try to ask and say, is consent look okay, or would you rather, move something to like action?
It's a great process.
We also will use the difference between polling and questions. So before I queue up staff for a presentation that might elongate the meeting, we'll say, if it's just a few questions, can we just answer those for you? And are you still okay with voting? And sometimes that works, and the board member will just leave it in consent. If they can just get a quick few questions answered, that works also.
Yeah. And that's why I would encourage the newer board members to think about that. Sometimes there are questions that you have that you think would be valuable for the public to hear the answer to, because if you don't know it, maybe they don't know it. And so that might be a reason to pull something from consent, but it might not too. So I think that's just going to be a judgment call that you'll have to make. And it sounds like when you pull something, it goes right to the action section of your items for action, items for approval. Okay. Any questions about consent, the use of consent, how to pull something? Okay, great. Let's go to the next slide. So this is about future agenda items. So does one of the board members want to talk me through how you get something on an agenda currently? It probably has to be one of the veteran board members.
Here we go again.
Okay. So there on our agendas, every meeting, except for, I don't even remember if it's on this study session, but it's like the future agenda items, to request a future agenda item, and you can ask then, like, we can't really discuss the merits of it one way or the other. You wait on that until the agenda item actually is presented, but then you're asking. And so you have Ms. Counts there, and you have Dr. Trujillo there. You can also send an email to Dr. Trujillo requesting an item. And sometimes people want the presentation because it's important to do in public, and others it's like, I just want to understand this. So it just depends on, you're asking for this agenda item. Sometimes it's a meeting with Dr. Trujillo, because it's like the information I want is really in depth, and maybe not everyone in the public would appreciate it, or maybe my fellow board members don't want that kind of detail. And others are big ones, like, let's talk about funding for arts and music. Okay, well, that's something that we'll all want to talk about. So then that's an agenda item. Dr. Trujillo might say, let's not do a separate agenda item for that. We're going to have a really big financial discussion, February, whatever. And is that okay that we put it on that date? And then that's usually the way that goes. We've changed a couple of things in our policy. We used to be able to choose board members to put an item on the agenda. I think it's a good idea for board members to be able to put items on the agenda. It's just sometimes they can be consolidated into other ones. And so since we don't always know what agenda items are coming up, I think that the process that we have now is working, unless someone highlights that, they wanted something on and it didn't get on. But so far, I've been able to put things on the agenda. There was a time when that wasn't happening, but I think it's better. And then now it will be our first meeting, but we're resurrecting agenda committee. And what that is 2 board members with the superintendent and legal just kind of going over the agenda. I think that we've done that before. It made a lot of sense, and it's a rotating position. So all of us will have the opportunity to sort of see what goes into it. And I think that's helpful too.
Okay, great.
Rob, can you talk about a little bit of our policy? If there is a board member that really wants something to see an item on the agenda, and they have one other board member in support, but but the rest of the board really doesn't want it on the agenda, and the superintendent's not really. What is the process for kind of difficult agenda items? Or just if you can talk about our policy there.
So your BEDBA policy actually still does have the if any two board members request that an item be placed on agenda, they notify the superintendent. And the item will be placed on an agenda with a meeting date mutually agreed upon by the two board members and the superintendent. If no agreement is reached, then you bring it to the board at that future agenda items part of your regular board meetings. Actually, it's at every action meeting. It's not on the, I don't think it's on the, maybe it is on the agenda tonight. I actually don't remember. Usually not in a retreat because there shouldn't be any action at all. But that process is still there in the policy. And if there's an individual board member who may not, get a friend to go with them on this road on a board item, then they can ask the superintendent. And this is what the policy says: an individual board member can request an item be placed on the board's agenda by sending the board agenda item to the superintendent, and the item should normally be scheduled within 8 weeks of the request, but it can be extended. So there's a couple of ways to do it. It can also just be, you're having your one-on-one discussion with the superintendent, because the superintendent can always put things on the agenda. And maybe you two can agree that, yeah, that's something the board should discuss. And then there isn't really a board, except for that, just kind of a discussion with the superintendent. There isn't really a board action that's needed. But you've got several avenues to get items on the agenda.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I think it sounds like the superintendent's office tracks all the future agenda items, so I don't think we need to talk about that. We would recommend that you make sure that something that you're requesting for an agenda is actually board business. It's board work, so it's governance related, so that you can keep your focus where it needs to be. So is it something to celebrate? Is it a policy or something that has to have board action? Or do you need it to ensure accountability? So those are just a few questions that we would encourage you to think about as you're going through that requesting future items on the agenda. Any new members have questions about that process, what that looks like? I'm assuming you've observed board meetings, so you probably understand it. Okay, so we are at 7 o'clock. We have about 10 slides left. Do we need to do a short 5-minute recess to kind of regroup, or do you want to just keep on going?
I'm good with if we keep going.
Me too.
Okay, let's keep going then. Okay, so the next slide. So board member preparation agreements. So I think we already know the answer to this, that the board members will call, but you're not really going to call because you're going to discuss it with Dr. Trujillo at your board agenda review individually. So that's great. I think that's a great system. I may steal that and take that back to my school district because I like that. So what the other agreements are, board members will come to the meeting prepared to discuss items on the agenda. I know it's obvious when people aren't prepared, so just know that before you get there. You notify the superintendent before the meeting about positive and negative comments received from the community on specific items, and board members will give the superintendent time to research clarifying questions. And this really speaks to that support, not surprises. You don't want to really ask for lots of information at a board meeting that the superintendent did not have time to pull together, because it's just going to make everyone look like they're not prepared. So everybody good with this agreement? Okay. So let's go to the next one. So during the meeting, The board president will ensure that only one person speaks at a time and that each member has an equal opportunity to participate. Board members will model the behaviors expected of students, staff, and community members. Make sure that your procedures for public comment or call to the audience are clear and available at the meeting site. And then only the board president will respond to public comment during the meeting. And that in the way that the board president may recognize the superintendent for factual information or direct the superintendent to connect with the community member. And then there is the ability for board members to respond to a personal attack that is allowed by statute. It's certainly not something I would suggest you do because I think it just creates more conflict. So any questions about any of those?
I think our policy is a little different on the public comments where we allow board members to respond and it's not just the president.
If it's an agenda item?
No, for the call, I thought this was about the call to the audience.
Yeah. So the item's not on the agenda, and Mr. Ross, correct me if I'm wrong. The item's not on the agenda. There should be no response. Is that correct?
Well, technically under the law, there are 3 things that the board members, any board member can do in response to a call to the audience. They can, as we already talked about this, respond to a personal criticism. That's one thing you can do. You can ask that staff look into a matter, and you can ask that an item be put on a future agenda. That's what the open meeting law permits you to do. Whether a board, makes kind of an agreement among themselves to something like what's on the slide, that's kind of a individual board's decision. But the practice here has been to be able to do those 3 things as any board member. Of course, only 2 board members can comment on any item that's not on the agenda. So those are all from the statute that allows that kind of, that's the limit of the response that a board member can do.
Okay, sounds good. But no back and forth discussion, questions about to the audience member about what they're talking about.
Yeah, unless it's on the agenda, that's not allowed. And also, I think, as you mentioned, probably not a good idea, even if it is on the agenda.
Yeah. Okay, great. Any questions about that? Okay, let's keep moving then. The next slide, still during the meeting agreements, the superintendent will provide clarifying information to board members. Issues, not people, will be discussed during board meetings. Members will listen respectfully to each other and staff with no side conversations, no distracting behavior. We get a lot of members calling us about cell phone usage on the dais. Those kinds of things are distracting not only to your fellow board members, but they're distracting to the public who are watching, attending your meetings. It's everybody's responsibility to monitor compliance with open meeting law. And it's not just the board president's responsibility. It's everybody's responsibility. And then we just have a thing that says board members will refrain from making long, unnecessary speeches that don't move discussion forward. If you're talking about something that's going to move discussion, is pertinent to the topic, then absolutely talk as long as you want. But just be careful that you're not just adding words to a meeting that will make it less efficient. So any questions about that? Okay. Unless someone yells it out, I'm going to assume everybody's okay with that. Okay. After the meeting agreements, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky sometimes, because if you're in the minority, it may be hard to support the majority decision of the board. So, and what we like to say is, not undermine it. So, don't join a group of people protesting outside district office, those sorts of things. So the confidentiality laws of executive session are very strict, as you discussed earlier during the open meeting law presentation. So I'm not going to get into that. But then the superintendent will make sure that all documents, records, reports, all of the things that have to happen by law following a board meeting are actually done. Any questions about any of that? And I always like to say it's okay to explain your vote if someone asks you if you voted in the minority, but the end of that should be the majority of the board made a decision, and that's the direction we're going, so that they can see that there's unity on the board, even if you don't all agree, which is a hard place to be. So. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. And this is where we talk about site visits. And I imagine you guys could roam around the district for a really long time before anyone might know that you're there on campus somewhere. So is there a process for this that you currently utilize? If so, what is it, and is it working? Yes, Dr. Trujillo.
I think all the board members have, and our 3 new ones are just joining us. And obviously right now, nobody's really doing a lot of site visits. But the few that have been done, the board members are doing a great job of checking in with me or the board office. Usually the board office schedules or keeps track of where the board members are going. So that's been a process that's worked for us. And really, I think it speaks to what you talked about earlier, is even though our governing board really can't take any action unless it's a legally convened meeting, perception is reality. And to our employees, their positions are larger than life. So when a board member just kind of rolls up, and I'm in the same category. So I'm always very cognizant about announcing and giving principals time, like, okay, Dr. Trio's coming, he'll be here in a few days, versus the roll-up. I think the roll-up, sometimes that's okay, but there's always an element where you give the staff a heads up, so that they know that you're on your way. So when we go through the board office and we're able to call the school, it works, or we call the school, usually that works out, and it doesn't create too much anxiety on the part of the employees that are receiving them for the school visit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would say the exception to that is love of reading. When everyone's asking you to go, they're expecting visitors. And so I don't think we need to go through that process then. But I do think in this one, it really is appreciating the time that their staff, I think it's important. Because, we've had board members that have 4-hour site visits. And I think just it's difficult for them to cut a meeting off with a board member. I think it's hard for any school personnel to do that.
My board, it's not formal, but we kind of have an informal agreement that if you're going to go to a school to do a visit, you stay there 30 minutes and no more, because this principal has a job to do. The teachers have a job to do. All the staff have a job to do. And you being there may be a distraction from that. So I would agree with that. Remembering that you are going to follow all the rules that a regular visitor would follow on campus. So that's signing in, whatever those visitation protocols are for a community member, you would do the same thing. You're not obviously there to evaluate staff or give direction to anyone, and, not to accept any gifts or favors. Now, does that mean you shouldn't take a bunch of cards that children made for you? No, of course, you're going to take that. But that's just thinking about that. And then you all are parents in the district. So this is another one I think can get a little tricky, especially if you're a newer board member. How do you approach problems or concerns that you have with your own students? And how do you make teachers understand you're there to represent yourself as a parent and not as a board member? So those are a couple of things. And I don't know if Adelita or Layla have anything to add about that, but it can be a little bit tricky sometimes.
They'll just ask you because, they assume that you know all the answers to stuff. So I've been a part of my kids, like the PTO at school, and they're like, well, let's ask Adelita. I'm not the representative for school. I'm just Joaquin's mom at this meeting. And what I've done with every principal and teacher, it's like, I am my child's mom. I know that I'm on the governing board, and if there's an issue that you all have, obviously, let me know. But for the most part, like, don't, if I'm at a function, like a school function, don't say, oh, and board member blah 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 is here. It's like, because I'm his mom, and it's not. If I'm at a school that isn't my kids, I totally get it. But if it's my kid's school, then I'm here as a mom. I'm not here. I won't be reporting it on my board member activity reports because I had to be there.
Yeah.
I think for me, what has been really helpful is not jumping the process. And if I have concerns, following, that I talk about it with the teacher first. And if I can't address it, then so I'm showing everybody through my actions that I respect the system and the process. And then, just being explicit with if it's ever needed. Luckily, it hasn't ever been needed, because my kids have just been at one school so far. But I could see how that would be helpful to be explicit. I'm just here as JoJo's mom or whatever that is. But I think, for me, it's just showing through my actions that I respect their role and my role. And I show through my actions that my role is strictly as a parent when I'm here.
Yeah. New members, any questions about that? Any thoughts? I haven't run into it yet, so you don't know.
I actually went to a school, my first tour a week ago. I was invited by the principal, and it was actually a really nice tour. It was a school that I attended as an elementary student in the district. So he wanted me to come and see the school and how it changed since I was there. And there's actually, he showed me yearbooks that actually have me in it. So those were fun to see. But it was, I made sure I was there not more than an hour max. And I followed all the rules. You had to have your temperature taken and sign in. Obviously gloves, there was sanitizer everywhere. I bring my own sanitizer with me everywhere in my purse anyway. So I just being respectful. And I've actually been also to my daughter's school, and then I ended up taking a tour with the principal there, but under different circumstances, because I came to school to go do some stuff on her behalf. So it's the same thing where I had to come in and sign in, you take the temperature and walk around, and I found the protocols to be just outstanding.
Great. I know in some scenarios I've sent my husband to talk about concerns or complaints with a specific teacher, just so there wasn't that, just so I wasn't in the room. And he tends to be less emotional about things than I do. So that I didn't want that mama bear thing to come out. So that's always been helpful for me.
Yeah, I do think with COVID, I'm sorry. Sorry, my internet is a mess. I do think with COVID, it's difficult for us to do site visits. I mean, I haven't been on a campus in a really long time because of it. And I just want to make sure that I'm not exposing anybody to me, really, because I'm, go places and stuff. So, but I think that site visits have been the most important piece of being a board member, period. Like you have to go and see how the policies that you pass are going to impact every school. And I think that is so critical and so important. And I'm glad that I've been able to visit all of our school sites, but I've had 19 years to do it. So don't don't go crazy, but I do think it's really important. And then, once you go, they'll invite you to things, and it's just so great because you get to see, you hear complaints about things because everything always, nothing is perfect and we can always improve. Absolutely. But going to different sites, you can see how really unique every community is. And some of them have some really wonderful ideas that should be district wide. There's like, this school is doing it this way, and I think it's amazing, and everyone should be doing it like this. And then you realize not every school is the same. I totally get it. You go to another school and you're like, oh my gosh, this is great. But there are some really great things. And I know that Dr. Trujillo makes a point of going out and visiting. I know that our assistant superintendents are out a lot. But as soon as it's safe, I would encourage you to go and check out as many schools as you can, because really it helps you to understand that like not one size fits all for everybody.
Yeah, and it really helps you to be able to be a great advocate for your school district. If you know what's happening, because no one is going to tell anyone positive things unless it's you all. The only things that come out are usually negative things. So, I consider that part of my job. And I think going site visits are one of the most rewarding parts of being a school board member. So I would echo Adelita's encouragement with that. And I'm going to assume that item 4, if a board member observes an issue on campus that needs follow-up, the concerns should be communicated to the superintendent so that he can make sure it can be addressed.
They're really good at that. That's I think a strength, especially like the veterans. It all helps. I mean, if there's nasty gum staining a campus, if the bathrooms are nasty, that I view that as just assistance. That kind of helps me get on something really quick and also identify trends. If it's a trend at a particular school, I might start taking a look at staffing or supervision, or what are the expectations if this is a recurring cleanliness issue. So that's a good strength.
What's helped me too is taking pictures of things. Sorry, children. Taking pictures of things and sending them to Dr. Trujillo, because I think that also helps. Then you don't have to explain it so much. You're like, this is what I saw.
Thank you. That's a great idea. Take pictures of it. Okay. So let's go to the next slide. And this talks about the board and the community communications. So you do have a role as an ambassador for the district, and really want to emphasize the positive aspects and the positive things that are going on, which we know are going on at every single site in your school district. One of the things that we talk about with this is if you're attending community meetings, and you talked a little bit about this earlier, the notice if you're going to all be together. So I'm not going to go over that anymore. You have a general counsel that you can go through those questions with. So, and then again, these are the policy, the complaints and concerns, and looking at your board policy and sharing those things with the superintendent. We've spent a lot of time on that already. So in this, we just say the board recognizes it is the last stop in the complaint process. Individual board members have no authority to solve problems, but individual board members can confirm with the superintendent if that complaints are being addressed. So any questions about that? Any thoughts about that? I think we've kind of gone over that already. Okay. Well, that ends our time talking about the communication protocols. So we've made it through really quickly, and I think that means that you have great communication already happening in the school district. So I always talk with every board about board self-evaluation. The evaluation of the superintendent is required in statute, but the board's evaluating itself is not. So this is a really conscious decision that boards have to make to do a self-evaluation, and ASBA has developed an evaluation tool to help you with that process. So if we go to the next slide. The evaluation tool has 5 different pillars of board service that are connected with those 8 characteristics of affected boards. So all of those characteristics are interwoven into this evaluation tool that we've developed. So the 5 pillars are conduct and ethics and vision. And then if we can go to the next slide, structure, accountability, and advocacy. So those are the 5 different pillars that the tool measures. Every one of those has a number of different benchmark questions, and you get kind of a really nice detailed report. It's only about 70 questions, and so this is the way we provide feedback on that. So if you want a basic report that just looks at how you're doing with each of the pillars, that cost is free. To get a detailed report and the benchmarks of success and question by question results, there is a cost for that. And then we're happy to come help the board go through that detailed report, facilitate discussion around that in the first session, and then a second session if you want to set some goals. And we talk a lot with boards about having their own goals for their own board governance that are different from what the district goals are. So often what comes out of this tool for many school districts is communication is an issue with the community, the community understanding the decisions that they make, how they communicate those decisions. And there are some other ones, but that's the most frequent one is how are we interacting with our community? How do they know who we are and how do we know who they are? So we do that, setting those goals in that option for the last section. Any questions about that?
I have a question, but I don't know if it's going to violate OML because I'm wondering how, or not OML, but it's not agendized, but if we were interested in going this route with a more detailed report, could we, I don't know, how do I request that?
Well, I could jump in and say that you put that on an agenda
On
for the board to discuss. Yeah, put it on a board agenda. You can talk about what you want the report to look like. So that would be something you'd want the board to vote on.
Okay, so it would be the AS requesting that our board ASBA self-evaluation.
Yep, I can send you some information that'll make it easier to come up with an agenda item.
Okay, and then I have another question. That would be great if you could send that to me. I have another question. How is it a self-evaluation if we're receiving a report from ASBA on how we're doing?
So what this is you're giving your impressions of the board.
Okay.
So it's a self-evaluation, like a holistic self-evaluation, not individual self, but board self, because you're one group.
Right. And then it's about 70 questions. We turn that into ASBA, and then you give a report to us on areas that are trends that you're noticing with all board members on where we could work, and then strategies on how to do that. Okay.
Yeah. So it's an electronic survey. It's just through SurveyMonkey. So I send a link to every board member and the superintendent, because it is intended for the board and the superintendent to take the survey together. The results then come back with 6 different results for each question, and what it does is it kind of is we always do this, we sometimes do this, we never do this, or I don't know if we do this. So it's kind of just like that 4 answers to every single question, and it's color coded. And when you see it, you can tell, what you need to work on just by the colors that are popping up.
I mean, obviously we need more time as a board, but hopefully I could get that on an agenda, future agenda items for sometime in the summer or something.
Yeah. And this is a great time, to even go over it. individually, not that we have to be with you, but if you want to have someone from the district kind of help facilitate that conversation, or one of the board members, or you all just want to have an open conversation about it, a retreat is a really great place to kind of review it.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. And then we could just go to the last slide. That's it. So I'm getting you out of here pretty early, but I don't want to leave without answering any questions. So is there anything that I didn't cover, anything about board governance that you have questions about? What else can I do for you?
Can we go back to one more slide and just leave that up for a little bit? So I could, yeah, thank you.
I think that would be a really good thing for us to do. Maybe giving board members a little bit of time to get comfortable, get things a little more back to normal. But I've in the time that we've been on the board, we've tried to do this a couple different times. And I think that it's really the board members have to be open to it. Because if you're not, then it's, you know, it's kind of torturous to go through this evaluation when you're like, if you know, especially if there's a lot of tension, it seems that would require more mediation than an evaluation. But I do think that this, you know, I really feel very confident that this board is gonna, we all seem really focused on just doing the best for our students and staff. And so, and I'm optimistic. So I would really be interested in doing this maybe at the end of this calendar year, like next January, and see, somewhere like that. And then I want to just thank you, Julie. I think that this was really helpful and a good review for everybody, because it doesn't really matter how long you've been on a board. The dynamics change with new board members. And so it's really good for us to get a feel for how each of us is. And I think the only way to do that is to have opportunities to have conversation. And, you know, we haven't really had that. So I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you. And Dr. Trujillo, do you want to?
I was going to say the same thing. Thank you. Thank you for your time. I was very impressed. I think this has been a really, really great time well spent. And I'm excited to work with all 5 of our board members. I think all of them are doing a great job. They're off to a great start as a collective unit. And I see things only getting better. So thank you again for coming out and facilitating this training.
You're welcome. And I tell every board this. I consider it a real honor and privilege to be working with school boards. So thank you for having me be part of this as well. So, and if there's anything else you need from me, let me know. But I will send a training summary and this PowerPoint to Dr. Trujillo and have him get it out to all the board members so that you have the information that we discussed. So that's it. I'm going to say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't have the agenda in front of me. Are we just on to future agenda items? Okay. Board members, do you have anything? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And I just have to reiterate that, you know, I said that I was excited and reinvigorated because of a leadership role, but really, I think it's what I'm truly reinvigorated by is this fresh start in a new board and already feeling really good about it. So thank you.
Yeah. Me too. I think it'll be good. It's going to be good.
All right, everybody be safe, and we'll see you when we see you. Good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.